Good morning, and welcome to RidgeVineyards Spring 2017 Virtual Tasty. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is David Amadia. I'm the president of Ridge, and it's going to be my pleasure to host and moderate today's tasting. We're coming to you live this morning from our Lytton Springs winery in Dry Creek Valley. We're seated right in front of the Lytton Vineyard. It's an old vine vineyard planted in 1901, more than 100 years ago. And I think we hit it spot on in terms of choosing the date for the spring tasting. We have beautiful weather here today in Dry Creek, and I think probably it'll be the warmest day of the year in 2017 so far. So lovely sunshine that's blinding us right now, to be honest, but it's beautiful out here. We'll be tasting 6 wines with you today, our spring releases. The 6 wines, and this will be in the tasting order, will be the 2015 Estate Chardonnay, 2015 Paso Robles Zinfandel, 2015 East Bench Zin, 2015 Geyserville, 14 Estate Merlot, and then we'll finish with the 2014 Estate Cabernet. These are all very young wines. We here at the winery decanted these wines about an hour ago, and just to get them to open up a bit. Hopefully you've been able to do the same, and that you have the wines poured out in front of you on your fancy dancy tasting mats, and you're ready to roll with us here. See, a couple of things I wanted to talk about before we get going. First, this is an interactive event, so we really thrive on your questions and comments, so please do pass those through to us. You can either do that utilizing the chat function here on YouTube live streaming, or simply shoot us an email. And if you send the email to wholesale at ridgewine.com. All those will be passed through to me here, and we'll make sure that our production team gets the questions. So I'd like to introduce the stars of the show, our key members of our production team that are joining us, and I'll introduce them from my left. First to my left is John Olney. John's our CEO at Lytton Springs right here. John joined Ridge in 1996, and he's in, I believe, his 20th year here at Ridge. Thanks for joining us today. In the middle is David Gates. David's our Senior VP of Vineyard Operations, joined Ridge in 1989, and he's in his 27th year at Ridge. And on the far left is Eric Baugher, our COO at Monte Bello, the Monte Bello winemaker, joined Ridge in 1994, and is in his, let me do the math, 22nd year?
22nd, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay, there you go. I'd like to thank the panel for being here this morning. Before we begin, a few acknowledgments. First, I'd like to acknowledge our production team that has been doing this so many years. We were trying to do the math this morning, but we believe this is our 6th year, so this is something like our 12th virtual tasting, and we'd like to thank Fill in the Blank Media for doing such a good job all these years. I'd also like to welcome our new distributor partner in Chicago, Maverick, who began representing Ridge in February of this year and is participating in their very first virtual tasting. We're excited to have you all on board and partner with you, and looking forward to the impact you're going to have on our business there in that important market. I'd like to also welcome our first formal international participant in the virtual tasting, our broker in the province of Alberta, Renaissance, and a big California welcome to you, and thank you for joining us this morning as well. Hopefully you're the canary in the coal mine, the first of maybe many more international participants in our virtual tasting, so thanks for joining us. And I'd just like to take a minute to highlight some of the great press we received really in the last 10 to 14 days. We did send out an email on this a couple of days ago. Wine and Spirit, they do their annual restaurant poll, and Ridge came in at number 18 as one of the top wineries and top restaurants here in the United States, and the top Zinfandel producer in restaurants in the US. So some nice acknowledgement there. Drinks International, the UK-based publication, came out with their annual list of the most admired wine brands in the world. And again, Ridge was in the top 10 at number 7. And probably the thing that's probably got the most attention, and congratulations to Eric Baugher, our decanter, out of the UK awarded the 2013 Monte Bello a perfect 100-point score for the 13 vintage. I don't know if many of you still have 13 Monte Bello in inventory, probably not. I know we don't have any really to speak of, but an amazing acknowledgement for that wine for sure. So let's start with the first wine, the 14 Estate Chardonnay made at the Monte Bello Winery. So I'm going to ask Eric to kick that off for us.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be here today. Nice warm sunshine here. I'm drinking some great Chardonnay. This is the 15 vintage from Monte Bello property. The growing season was still drought year up on the mountain, below average rainfall. A little bit better than 14 vintage, but still just the vines were really feeling the pain of that growing season. They weren't as productive in yield. In fact, during bloom, the yields were knocked down. So this was a really small production vintage. Harvest was early. The summer that year was really nice and warm, so the low yields combined with just that really nice ideal summer weather ripened the crop pretty quickly. So by third week, fourth week of August, we were well into the harvest before we really even got into the red. So it was really kind of ideal timing in the winery of just having the whites come in because they tie up the press. So the fruit got handpicked, brought to the winery, whole cluster press. Each little lot was then sent to barrel for natural yeast fermentations, which is down below ground in the 130-year-old cellar. Fermentations were really quite complete by late December. Most of the natural yeast fermentations were done. Malolactics were a little longer to start and then kind of dragged out well past the assemblage. So we did the assemblage in July of 2016, tasting the different lots and looking for those that had really good fruit focus and elegance, oily texture on the palate. We brought those together. And once it was assembled, then the malolactic really was able to finish by September. We barreled it down again and held it in neutral oak for that extended settling period and was able to get it to clarify really well for a January bottling. So separating it at that last date to the bottling tank, we had to be very careful. So this is unfiltered. We had to really look at weather, barometric pressures, all of that, and racking when the moon was just right so that we can get good gravitational pull to keep the lees at the bottom of the barrels. Yeah.
So was there a Monte Bello Chardonnay produced in
there
2015?
Is, yeah. So I have a small production of Monte Bello Chardonnay. It's still in the cellar on its lee. It's made up of some of our newer parcels on the Rooston Ranch, which is organic. So that's going to be the first Chardonnay to be bottled with the organic grape on the ingredient line. So and the other great thing is that it's 13.5 alcohol. So we were able to get really good flavor development at a lower level of ripeness.
And is that due to the new vines and new clones
yeah,
we're using?
the selections that we have there, and also being a little bit higher up the mountain. Mm-hmm. It seems the microclimate's really kind of ideal on that site on Monte Bello.
And the biggest complaint about this wine is there's not enough
yeah,
of it.
There's
15
the
was
output
very small.
of the vineyard was extremely small. Okay. Yeah.
Well, that's going to be a common refrain with
all these wines.
Yeah, and unfortunately 16. I mean, I was hoping I could report back that the yields were great, but not with Chardonnay.
About the same?
The yields were about the same.
So we'll see another short year next year with Chardonnay.
Yeah.
And do you remember how much 15 Monte Bello Chardonnay was
it's
produced?
like 500 cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have a little bit.
And about this here in total is about 2,100 cases.
Okay.
That we produced.
Okay.
But really concentrated. I mean, with the yields being that low, it just really made an amazing Chardonnay. A lot of richness, high acid. It's a really high acid vintage across the board for all the varieties in 15. Geyserville, the Monte Bello Cab itself. I mean, really good acidity.
So even
and here we have in the Chardonnay, Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, great. That's a terrific wine. Really enjoying that this morning. A great way to kick off
and
the
I've
morning.
been pouring it a lot out in the marketplace, and the question that always comes up is the oak. The assumption that, you cannot really feel much oak on this wine. There's only about 8% new oak that we brought into the cellar that vintage.
So that's one of the lowest amounts I've heard.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we've been tapering off and relying mostly on the older barrels, and especially with that extended settling being a neutral oak, whatever oak the wines might have received on their individual lots, by the time it's assembled and in those older barrels, it will totally integrate by bottling.
That's terrific. I mean, that's what I think really what the market is looking for, and
Yeah.
it really showcases the beautiful fruit in this wine,
Yeah.
which really should be the star because
Exactly.
it's just so amazing.
I mean, we have such a great vineyard site, that
Yeah.
limestone, all of that. We really want to have that be the main flavor and theme of the wine.
Absolutely. Well, good. All right. Thanks for that, Eric. Thanks for kicking it off. So we're going to move to the second wine, and David Gates is going to take us through the 15 Paso Robles Zinfandel.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
So I was just down yesterday visiting with Benito Ducey and his nephew Mike Ducey down in Paso. And I'm happy to say that this year, 2017, he has 24 inches of rain, as opposed to
amazing.
6 inches of rain for,
Wow.
for 2015.
What, and we had like
when-
2 inches
400%
during July?
Yeah, yes. Well,
Yeah.
that saved this
Yeah,
crop.
saved the vintage, yeah.
Yeah, no, and so 15 for Paso was like in our Sonoma vineyards and a little bit at Monte Bello, very low rainfall year. The vines really struggled, and then they got a big kind of, for Central Coast, it's almost like a monsoon rain in July that was almost half of that 6 inches, and that really saved the crop because the crop was low anyway, and the vines were really starting to struggle. Well, that amount of rain went directly to the vines and was able to they were able to get the grapes ripe very quickly and into the winery very quickly. And I would add to what Eric was saying about the acidity and that you'll see in the wines in the especially in the 2015 vintage across the board in California. It's going to be a nice year for acidity. And it shows up very nicely in this Paso, which always has that kind of voluminous fruit, but it can be a little bit softer in the tannins. Well, this extra acidity in the wine really fills the back palate and makes the finish even longer. So
Yeah, it's really stinging acidity.
Yeah,
it's
really
it's
present.
kind of unusual for Paso because I mean,
Yeah.
warm region Zin, it usually
Yeah.
comes in, on the high side of pH, but this is
no, it's pretty
I
good.
think 3.5 is where we're at in bottling.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah,
so
which
it's
is
nice and
pretty low.
juicy, lively. I mean, it gives it a nice, refreshing quality.
Yeah, and so, it's been several years now, but we did a kind of a three-way vertical tasting going way back, comparing Geyserville, Lytton Springs, and Paso. Remember? Yeah. And with the assumption that Paso wouldn't age as well as Geyserville or Lytton, and for the warm years, that was very true. The older Pasos had faded, so you'd want to drink them in 5 or 6 or 10 years or whatever. But in years where there was enough acidity, like this year or maybe 2010, they can go forever. Well, maybe not forever, but they can go for a long time.
I mean, they could be pretty surprised. At a lunch a couple years ago, someone brought out an 83 vintage Paso, and it was like 13, down in the 13% alcohol range, and it was still drinkable. I mean, it's that acidity.
It was one of those cool 80s
Yeah,
years.
I think it was
Yeah.
an 83 vintage, so
Yeah.
cool year in California.
Yeah.
Yeah, for old wines, I always say it depends on how old you like your wines.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up the rainfall, David, so maybe we talk a little bit about that. That's certainly on a lot of people's minds after 4+ years of drought here in California. We certainly had a lot of rain this year. What you want to talk to the
drought
specifics?
is over, right?
Yeah,
Is
it's
the drought
officially,
over?
Yeah, officially over.
According to
except for,
Jerry Brown, it is, right?
Except, except for one little section of Santa Barbara County, but they shouldn't grow. I'll behave. Yes, we're very fortunate. It's been raining, and I'd love for it to stop now. It's been raining quite a bit. We're over 6 inches here at Lytton Springs and Geyserville. A little bit less at Geyserville, almost to 60 inches.
660.
60, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Stan Buchagnani up in Cloverdale, so it's only 7 miles away from here. He's at over 70 inches. Monte Bello typically gets a little bit less, so we're at 48 or 46 inches, excuse me. And with this last little bit of rain, it keeps pushing it up a little bit.
Okay.
And like I say, Benny down in Paso, who typically is at 12 to 14 inches of rain a year, he's at 24. So they've had a solid a solid spring or winter's worth of rains down in Central Coast.
See, so it seems like Central, North Coast, everyone's sort of double normal is kind of where everybody is at.
That's what's happening, and what that's done to the vineyards, it's all good in the vineyards in that it's really filled the soil profile. It's pushing the water down into the aquifers, so there should be wells should recover all over the state. It's bad for the state's infrastructure because it's, we're losing bridges and
dams.
Hillsides and dams
Monte Bello
and roads. So it's exposed some of the neglected maintenance in our infrastructure. But most of the vineyards have followed through really well, and that's because the early winter rains. So you have to remember, those of you in the Midwest and the East Coast, that California is very dry in the summer. And we get all of our rain in the winter months. And so those first few rains in the fall are crucial to establishing the erosion potential, basically, for that year. And this last winter, though we did get a lot of rain early, it was spaced out beautifully. So the cover crops, everything came up really well, and that protected our hillsides and our valleys. And the rivers flooded, but not anywhere more than normal. And
right.
I think Guerneville was only underwater once, which is
for
that. Yeah, exactly. That's why the houses are built up on stilts there. It's looking good.
Great.
The only bad news on that is on the production side in the vineyard is that it just made our weed control costs go up.
Yeah.
Every rain we get from now on just makes them go up higher.
Yeah.
And you kept several passes through the vineyards to do the weed whacking
Exactly.
and keep them down.
Yes. Yeah.
Something you said a couple of days ago that was interesting to me, that as a benefit of the additional rain is that it releases nutrients in the soil for the vines also as a benefit for all this rain.
Yes, exactly. And it also keeps the microbes in the soil more active. As soon as the soil dries up, the microbes either go dormant or they migrate or they die.
Right.
And having extra soil moisture keeps them going longer, and then as they are fighting with each other and eating each other and whatever, all the stuff that they do underneath there, they're releasing nutrients to the vines. And so I expect the vines to be growing nicely and quite vigorously this year, which will add to their fertility, which will add to 2018's crop.
Yeah.
And 17 too? Come on.
The cluster numbers are set for this year from last year.
Okay.
The cluster size is going to be set this year. The cluster numbers on the young vines are abundant and plentiful, I should say. The old vines, there's still some that just have single clusters per shoot. And then we just have to wait and see what happens during bloom and set. But one thing is for sure, in a wet year like this, the clusters, if they set well, they're going to be full.
Yeah.
And so with Zinfandel, in a dry year, if you think your yields are going to be a little bit low, they're always lower than you think.
Right.
In a wet year, you think your yields are going to be a little bit higher. The clusters are always fuller than you think. So, so there'll be juicy berries.
Juicy,
there.
Some optimism there. I love that.
Yeah, well,
Good.
That's farming. You have to either be insane or optimistic.
That's why you're in farming,
or
David.
both.
All right. Well, thanks for that, David. We're going to move to the third wine, which is our 2015 East Bench Zinfandel, right here from Dry Creek Valley. This vineyard's, maybe a mile from here, a mile and a half. So, John, can you take us through this?
Sure. So, East Bench. Actually, it's pretty rare that we would have these two Zinfandels, the Paso and the East Bench, side by side. But it's a good opportunity to see what for us are really the only Zinfandels we distribute, which are 100% Zinfandel. Most of our Zinfandels, like we'll see with the Geyserville, are field blends with other varietals like Petite, Sirah, and Carignan. So this really highlights, I think what Dry Creek Zinfandel is really all about. It's a single vineyard, really, really red, beautiful dirt up on the bench, thus the name, on the east side of Dry Creek Valley. It's a vineyard that we planted just 15 years ago, so relatively young vines, but you can really see the wine coming into its own in these past few years. The roots are getting more established and there's a little more complexity to it. And 2015 certainly was a pretty unique vintage. I mean, the yields were very low, so we had great concentration, and you almost expected wines that were going to be perhaps a little over extracted, maybe a little more structured than you might like, and yet it's just it resulted more in just beautiful balance, like we were saying about acidity, ripe, but the grapes were not too ripe, and I think a real they're very sumptuous wines. I mean, almost elegant. Certainly very drinkable immediately upon release.
Yeah, it's a beautiful wine. It still has that, even for a wine with 100% Zin, has that nice sort of chalky tannin sort of coating the wine. And it has the same sort of acidity that the Paso does, that brightness as well. The wine's very fresh, but very, very accessible in its youth here.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it needs Petite Sirah. I mean, it's
No.
like the Zin is just giving it such beautiful structure.
So this is our 10th vintage. Yeah.
That's right.
Why didn't we
Yeah.
put a 10 on the label?
We missed out.
You guys are going to put a 50. Why don't we put a 10 on the East Bench?
Let's put an 11.
And we did, John and I did try the first vintage just a couple of weeks ago, the 06, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was a
Showing
beautiful
beautifully.
wine. Yeah.
Surprised us a little bit, but it showed really well at 10 years of age, or more than 10 years of age now. All right, so we're going to move on to our third red wine, the 2015 Geyserville,
Which does have a 50 on the label.
which does have
Yeah,
a 50
it's the
on the
50th,
label.
yeah.
Why do we have a 50 on the label?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's our 50th vintage.
Yeah, it's
That's
got
right.
It's our 50th vintage, yeah.
Yeah, so our 50th vintage at Geyserville. And let me just see my notes. And John, you're going to take us through that wine as well. Yeah.
Sure. So the Geyserville, a classic, probably our two most classic vineyards, the ones we've been working with the longest, Geyserville and Lytton Springs. Geyserville, the blend almost always has a little more Carignan in it as opposed to Lytton Springs, so it has that nice kind of it gives that sort of a jammy, almost a zinginess to the fruit, which is quite unique in Zinfandel. But again, with low yields, I think you really do see here. I mean, this to me is more of a structured kind of
Yeah,
Geyserville.
I mean,
It's something
yeah.
that's actually built for
It's almost
aging.
got Cabernet like tannin structure
Yeah.
to it. Yeah. But then the acid, I mean, it was such an acidic year at Geyserville. It reinforces those tannins.
It's really interesting to try it after the East Bench. You just
Yeah.
see with the field blend and all the different components coming in, the more complexity in the Geyserville
dimension
and the
that
dimension
is
of the
given
wine.
to the wine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to age forever.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Certainly
but
great
sadly,
example.
not a lot of it was made.
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
the yields were down 30%. We did our normal selection as well, so it wasn't like everything that we brought in made the cut during the assemblage.
And this was really the only year of the drought, of the 4-year drought, where Geyserville yields were actually down a little bit. It's an amazingly resilient vineyard. The old vines a little bit less so. Their yields were down again last year, but typically it just bounces back. It stays very consistent. And but this year the lack of rain really over the years took effect, and then that rain during bloom didn't help either.
Tasting the wine, for me, there's certainly the sense the higher level of acidity, but the fruit to me is a little darker
It is,
than the normal
when it
Geyserville.
moved to
Yeah.
the dark side. I think it was that kind of. Yeah, there's those. Yeah, the more red fruit years, and then the darker fruit years. 15 was one of those vintages where everything shifted into the darker fruit. I think that was kind of late season heat that we had mid-September during the harvest.
Do you think it's also just the concentration from the drought?
Concentration for sure, but also just getting that good heat right in the days of harvest can really have an impact on the flavors.
Absolutely stunning wine, though. It's
Oh,
sort
it
of
is.
built for aging. This will be.
Oh.
We need to increase our reserves on this
Yeah,
wine, I think,
for sure.
unfortunately. But it's certainly going to be around for a long time.
Yeah.
So a good time to talk a little bit about organic certification and where we stand. Maybe I'll ask David to comment on this in terms of moving forward. And there's a lot of interest from our distributor network about, obviously East Bench has moved forward, is organically certified on the label. Where are we with Geyserville and Lytton and some of the other estate wines?
So Geyserville and Lytton are about in the same place. I mean, we could do a 100% organic wine now out of the grapes that we have, but it would just mean smaller quantities of each because there are a few blocks in each of the ranches that have been going into the main blend, but that are not yet organically certified. Geyserville, this year was supposed to be the year, but there was a little hitch in our giddy up on organic certifying of 2 of the blocks that typically go into this, and so it's going to be delayed 1 more year. So by vintage 2018, Geyserville will be 100% organic. As it is now, this wine is I think 92% organic or something like that.
Just 2 blocks, and that's not even a large amount of fruit. It's just with this vintage being so short on tonnage. If we kept those 2 out, I mean, the quantities would have been really low.
It would be interesting if we did a poll of our distributor network. You know, do you want organic certification or do you want 15% less wine? And you had to make a choice. What would you choose? And I think they'd probably choose more wine. So I think that's the right direction. And I think it is important just from a sales knowledge perspective that these wines are over 90% organically certified grapes going into them. Where we're just on the margin. It's those last sort of challenging blocks that we're dealing with to try to get across the line.
Sure, and Lytton, it's a little bit different story. There are a couple blocks that have that perform beautifully, but they're on very steep terrain, and we have not yet decided to commit to all the extra handwork that it takes to making them organic. We have new blocks that are already in organically certified ground coming up, and I expect that as those come up, then we'll be able to pick and choose and maybe do a small winery-only selection of some of those other blocks, or maybe we will say, okay, the economics now justify moving ahead with organics on those hillside blocks, but that's kind of where we are.
So we don't have the same sort of definitive date in terms of the transition for Lytton?
No, it all depends on quantities and whatnot.
So if we have a bigger harvest, that makes the decision a little easier for us, though,
It does, especially as the younger blocks, which typically yield more as they come into production, and their quality, we can ascertain that their quality is going to be high enough, like I expect it to be, then we can look at those other blocks and either hold them out or start to take them organic.
And I think it's a nice time that we should point out for our audience that we are the largest grower of organic grapes in all of Sonoma County, and as well in the Santa Cruz Mountains appellation.
Well, Santa Cruz, it's a slam dunk because we have
we got the biggest vineyard.
We have 10. We have 10% of the appellation is our vineyards. So
it's a little easier over there. But here there are some very big growers here, very large growers, and for us to be the largest is quite outstanding, amazing. And in a county that's really put a lot of its reputation about being sustainable. I mean, that's what they talk about constantly here, is sustainability.
It's a big debate, and in the wine industry right now, sustainability seems to be on the upswing, but it's difficult to talk about. You can't just say, for better or for worse, when you say something is organic, people think it's no spray. That's what, you don't spray anything, which is not true, but you can say that in 3 words or 2 even, if you want. Sustainability.
It sounds good as a word, though.
Yes,
it does.
But the meaning is amorphous, and you can't just say it in 3 sentences. You have to. It's a difficult concept. It's an important concept because you can't, in my opinion, you can't just be organic or conventional. You still need to be sustainable. You have to be able to treat your land well so that it rewards you over the years. You have to treat your people well so that they reward you, and they stick around. And you have to make a profit, otherwise you're not going to be in business.
That's all about sustainability.
That's all.
I think the important part of that also for me is that moving away from self-certification of sustainability and moving to actual third-party certification, that's an important aspect for me. It puts a little more teeth in that, and when you say sustainable, that when you have a third-party certification.
Absolutely.
So that's really important, I think, in terms of the sustainability of sustainability. I mean, that's an important part of it. I think.
I totally agree, and most all of the organizations around in the wine world have recognized that fact, and they're working toward that. So that's good, especially here in Sonoma County.
And who, just so people know, who are our certifiers here at Lytton and up at Monte Bello?
So we are using the same. It's Fish Friendly Farming. It's from the California Land Stewardship Institute, and it's known in Napa. Of course, Napa has to brand everything, so it's called Napa Green there. But fish-friendly farming is all about basically keeping your soil in place and doing everything you can to limit erosion and eliminate or limit leaching into the aquifer, so that you're basically cleaning up the rivers that have anadromous fish like salmon or steelhead and that. So and it's Monte Bello, it's the first time they've moved down to Santa Clara County. So we currently now have all of our vineyards certified through fish-friendly farming at Monte Bello.
That's great.
So it's great. It's awesome.
Well, good. Well, before we move on to the Bordeaux varieties, I've just been advised that we actually have 2 Canadian brokers participating this morning. So I want to send a big welcome out to Vintage West out of British Columbia, and Matt Thurwell and gang. Thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. So we're moving on to the Estate Merlot, and David, the 14 vintage. Can you take us through that wine?
Sure. 2014 was kind of a crazy year, and again, a second full year of drought, third year of drought. And we ended up with a nice wet December, which was great. But then we had 0 rain in January, and January
80-degree heat.
Yeah,
it was the most unusual weather.
Crazy. January is the wettest month. Supposed to be, but that's the beauty of climate change, whatever you want to call it. So that what that did to the vines is pushed everything early. So bud break was early, bloom was early for Monte Bello, and harvest was early. We finished harvest on everything, I think, before October, right?
Yes,
in
September
2014.
24th.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
3.5 week harvest.
Yeah.
Versus 10 weeks. So
And very
it
early.
was just chaotic in the winery.
And everything together.
Yeah,
So
everything,
and Merlot is always ahead of Cabernet. We always start on the Merlot typically before we really get into the Cabernet, but they always they don't finish together, but they're commingled in the middle, very much so. And the Merlot came in very early this year.
It was beginning of September.
And really good concentration, which you can tell in the wine.
It's a really powerful vintage of Merlot.
Yeah.
It is amazing. I mean, to me, the typical vintages we've seen before the 14, more angular, more acidity.
Kind of really showing mountain fruit
really
character.
sharp.
Whereas
This is
the voluptuousness.
a lot of
Merlot.
mid-palate. Yeah, much more than I've seen in previous vintages.
Yeah.
It
And-
really
and-
is marked by that dry 14 year, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And these aren't the most structured Merlot. Those went into Monte Bello in 2014. These are the wine lots that were a little bit more accessible and more complete.
Yeah. This is an amazing wine. I mean, it's so different than what people expect from California Merlot. You know, they're more typically it's Valley Floor Merlot, Napa, rich, plummy, soft, virtually no tannin. You know, that's
And low acid.
And low acid. I mean, that's really the expectation for California Merlot. And Merlot can be hard to sell. So my biggest recommendation for this wine is take it out and show it to people, because once people taste this wine, they're just they're blown away by the quality and the style of the wine. It's not what people expect. And the more people taste this, the better. And it's I think almost the more sophisticated the buyer and the account, the better for this wine in terms of the understanding and appreciation of it.
And Eric, tell us about the oak regime on this, because I was saying some things in New Orleans in the market that I'm not sure.
Oh, really? I mean, it's American oak, like, yeah.
Fact check, yeah.
Fact check. Well, I mean, we give it a fair amount of new oak. I mean, it's
Early on, right?
Early on,
Yes.
as each of the individual lots that are picked and fermented, they go to barrel. They spend about 5 months in new oak on their own. Then we do the big assemblage tasting first for the Monte Bello, the estate cab, and then the estate Merlot. Once the blend's complete and we barrel down Monte Bello back to 100% new oak, we look at what's left over and try to give at least the estate wines 40 to 60% new oak. Which in 14, seeing that it ended up being a pretty good sized vintage at Monte Bello in terms of tonnage, I stepped in and bought some extra new barrels at the end of harvest, just so that we could make sure to give these adequate amount of new oak. So I'm sure we've got at least 40% new oak here, and then some good 1 and 2 year old barrels. And these are the smaller barrels that we use for the Zinfandels, the bourbon shaped barrels. 53-gallon. And a lot of it is now Kentucky oak, or moving in that direction of Kentucky oak.
A higher percentage from that forest.
Yeah,
from those
just,
regions.
it just seems to integrate so much more nicely into the wines,
Okay.
provide that mid-palate sweetness, and accentuate the fruit.
Okay. So we have several questions on this topic, so I'm going to sort of move backwards because it's more related to Zinfandel, not that it's not related at all to the Bordeaux varieties, but on our labels we talk about water additions. And, why are we doing that is one question. Another is it common in the industry? Do a lot of people do it? Why don't people talk about it? So these are some of the questions that we're getting. I mean, the reality is in Canada, we got 2 Canadian agents participating today, but in Eastern Canada, our labels were blocked. The ingredient label had water additions, and according to Canada, it's not illegal to add water to your wine, so they wanted to ban our wines because we put it on the label. So we're in a bit of a heated debate with them right now. I think we're making progress on that front. But John, you want to address some of these issues regarding to water?
I can jump in. So, first thing to say, I think, is that Zinfandel is a very big part of what we do at Ridge, and when you're making wine from primarily one single varietal, it's naturally those vineyards in that area, and most of our vineyards for Zinfandel, the vast majority of them are in Sonoma County, so they're going to ripen more or less at the same time. So at Ridge, for making all of our wines, but especially with Zinfandel, we really believe that keeping the wine, picking it at the right time so you get a finished wine that's in ideally the low 14s, but not in excess of 15%, is really critical to displaying the single vineyard, the quality of the single vineyards. And the way we make wine at Ridge, for example, if you take the Geyserville vineyard, it's divided into many subplots, and in any given vintage, the last of those plots that you bring in may be at a higher sugar than we really want it to, and that's where the judicious addition of some water brings those down. It allows them to ferment completely and allows us to maintain the alcohol levels that we're looking for. As far as how widespread it is, I would stop short of saying everybody does it, but that's probably the truth. But it's certainly a common tool. But wine is interesting in the sense that it's one of the few beverages or foods, things we consume that doesn't actually require ingredient labeling. So, it's really up to the winery if they choose to make a list of what they actually added to the wine, which, as you can see by looking at the back of our bottles, we have chosen to do.
Have done, and how much. I mean, we keep precise records on it.
Yeah.
And it's not done every year. And again, it's only going to be done on very select pickings of some of the later blocks that come in.
Yeah, and it's rehydration is what we're doing.
Exactly.
Right? We're putting water back in
the must. It's not in the wine
right.
once it's done. I mean, we're doing
it's
it
before
carefully,
the fermentation starts.
calculating it, and doing it at the start.
Yeah. There was a great article in the Chronicle earlier, just less than a week ago. Esther Mobley wrote on ingredient labeling and talked about Ridge and our label. She referred to us as cheeky, though. Do you think we're being cheeky by doing ingredient labeling?
No, I just think it's again, truth in advertising and transparency, letting people know exactly what we were doing to make these wines.
Right.
And the limits of what we'll add, to maintain producing wine with, again, the minimalist approach.
Right. Yeah,
well,
I think
it's not uncommon. I mean, if you look at traditional winemaking, you have to look at the area and what the grapes might lack or have in excess.
Sure.
And what they can do. For instance, it's illegal to add water in most of Europe to the must, but they can add sugar.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
I mean,
And here in our country, you can add
cannot-
water. I mean, it is
Right.
in the TTB regulations.
you can add water, but you can't add sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
So it depends on what
Yeah.
you have excess. We have
Yeah.
excess, sunshine.
Yeah, we have
and
plenty
they
of
have-
sunshine.
Anyway, so it's all
It's all about tradition
Yeah.
and sort of winemaking suited to the region you're growing in,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, but the reality is, as we all know, that the TTB does allow 60 different additives here in the United States. There are a lot of things you can add to your wine totally legally, and I think that's what ingredient labeling kind of addresses from our perspective, is that consumers aren't really aware of that. They don't really know what is going into their wine, which is, I think there's just an assumption on consumers' part that wine is a natural beverage, that there aren't any additives. And I think most people are shocked and surprised to find out that there are additives.
Well, and I think that refers to the cheekily, that comment by Cheeky, the
We're
Esther's
just
comment.
exposing,
Yeah, exactly.
or getting
And
people interested in knowing what those other ingredients are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this virtual tasting is open, so anybody can join in. So we do have some of our club members, our collector members, it looks like, are watching along and tasting along with us. And we have a question from one of them about the Estate Merlot: is when do you recommend pulling the cork on this? And if it is today, do you recommend decanting?
Yeah, I always do double decant when the wines are this young. It really does help open them up. I mean, the estate wines receive two years of barrel age, which really does help soften tannins. And then they go to bottle, get some bottle age before release. And they're really designed to be drinkable at release, but it's always recommended to double decant and just give that wine a little extra shot of oxygen to really release the fruit. But the ideal for me personally would be to drink these wines when they're about 2 to 3 years from release.
Okay.
That's kind of when they really hit that perfect moment of really settling down. And
Okay.
they won't be fully evolved, but they're just going to be further along in
Integration.
development. Yeah.
Yeah, oak and tannin are starting to soften and
Yeah.
integrate into the wine a bit.
It's like right now
Yeah.
I'd be drinking 2009s and 2010s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to move to our final wine, which is the 14 Estate Cabernet. And Eric, do you mind taking us through this wine?
So this is from Monte Bello property. It's from various parcels on the mountain. In certain spots where there's a little bit greater water availability to the vines, as well as richer topsoil. So just the way the vines grow, the berries tend to be a little bit larger in size, a little less tannic. As those pieces come into the fermenters and we begin to do the pump overs and begin fermenting out, I can taste and really watch the tannin extraction on these parcels so that they really produce a softer wine, basically a version of Monte Bello that you can actually drink young. So it is showing the Monte Bello terroir, but it's softer, a little bit more integrated tannin structure. The 14 vintage being a dry year, we're definitely dealing with the water stress in the vines. And smaller berries. Definitely the tannins were extracting rapidly this year, so the maceration time was cut short. So we were pressing off on the 5th and 6th day from crush,
Before that.
just to really avoid over extracting.
And were you pumping over? Or?
Yeah, we were doing the normal pump overs, but not as thorough. And then we were pressing early, just to really keep it soft. And barreling down, then we came to do the assemblage in February and began piecing it together, completing the blend with the 4 varieties we grow there. So Cab dominant, but then some Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Cab Franc to bring in complexity and some additional dimension of flavor.
Can you comment a little bit, Eric, on how the winemaking differs between the Estate Cabernet and the Monte Bello, maybe in this particular vintage, the 14? And what are you trying to accomplish with for the 2 different wines?
Well, in this case, it's all about accessibility, being able to drink it young. And so to do that, you have to really manage the tannins closely. Monte Bello, it's really about making sure it's got that adequate structure for the long-term bottle age. So there we'll be on the skins longer. We'll give it more pump over time. And when we press, and we fractionate and pull off the different pressure points, some of the better, richer portions of press will go into the Monte Bello lots, just to, again, really add more body to those lots. And then barrel down, do the tasting, and then within the group of the Monte Bello parcels, we select. So we're looking for minerality, we're looking for those big chalky tannins, and then we'll blend those together to make that year's vintage. Whereas these blocks that make the estate are really from select areas of the ranch where the vines have a little bit better vigor, and they're going to produce the bigger size berries that will make a softer wine.
Sure. Now, William Kelly, from Decanter, who wrote about the 13 Monte Bello, wrote about the 13 vintage generally in California, and really saying this was one of the great vintages of California. Do you agree with his opinion on the 13, and how does the 14 vintage compare to the 13?
Yeah, well, 13 I think was really classic. I mean, just kind of the most ideal. The wines, basically the vines and all the fruit had really good uniform ripeness. So just great physiological ripeness, phenolic ripeness. 14 was a different growing season, just that lack of rain, that warm winter, early start of the season, and then heat during the harvest. It really did create a totally different style of wine, more in the red fruit direction, and big tannins. So I would definitely keep the 13 at the top. The 14's just right below it.
What about the 12? Where does the 12 fit in there?
The 12 is just magical. I mean, that was, I don't know.
We've had some pretty good
that's going to be
vintages.
the two, 12 and 13 are going to be the really interesting ones. I mean, they're so similar, really amazing. And, it's only going to be over the long term that you're going to see which one ultimately will take over being the top spot.
These last few years remind me quite a bit about that, and for different reasons, but same overall quality of the early 90s, where each year was a little bit different, but each year was really nice in and of itself, and they've aged beautifully. So I mean, we're on
95 in that area.
We're at 91. We're on a roll. Another one of those rolls.
We definitely have had this nice long string of really great vintages. The 14 is absolutely amazing. These are really plush and really full, complete wines.
Yeah. After really going through those cool vintages in 2010 and 2011, and then from there, we've moved into drought, but probably more solid vintages, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, weather that's been cooperating with ripeness, getting good flavor development in the berries, nice phenolic ripeness.
And do you think that the stress that the drought provides in the end leads to higher quality?
It can, except, does it reach that tipping point where then it's a demise of quality, where the vines really run out of water resources, and now the berries are only ripening by dehydration?
It's a lot like
which
people.
Could be,
you can stress people so far, and then they go over the edge. Well, you can do the same with vines, right?
Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
A little bit of stress is good.
It's good, absolutely.
And a lot of stress is bad.
Yep.
Yeah. But in the case of vine, I mean, it definitely, it's easier to get ripeness in these drier years. You're not struggling. Like 10 and 11, I mean, the lack of sun and the cool weather during the harvest made it really tricky.
Yeah.
We had to really look at yield reductions and just hoping for good weather. And we finally got some good breaks in those vintages, but if we didn't get those breaks, it could have been a disaster of a vintage.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
But 14, with the big tannins. I mean, the other thing that I think William Kelly wrote about is just the finings that we didn't do in 13, and we generally, just to talk about egg white finings, we don't generally do that. It is not something that is common for us to do, unless there's a lot that we want to consider adding to the blend that maybe is too tannic. We might separately egg white fine that lot to target tannins, to reduce the tannins to a point where it's in better balance, and then include it into the blend. But in the Merlot and the Estate Cab of 14, both do show egg whites on the ingredient lines.
Right.
Fresh egg whites. So, I go down to the egg ranch and get
organic
the fresh eggs, the organic eggs, and we sit there and separate. We'll before we do, we actually are tasting different levels. So we're creating these lab samples that represent the different levels.
1 egg, 2 egg, 3 egg.
And we'll taste blind and just see which one actually has achieved reaching better balance of tannins and hasn't removed too much complexity from the wine.
Yeah.
Once we get that amount dialed in, then we'll physically do it to the wine.
Yeah, and I think the difference there between what we do, Eric, at Ridge and maybe Bordeaux. Bordeaux is a recepe.
Yeah,
they don't really taste the wines.
Yeah,
they
and
just
they will
do
do
by
it
recipe.
automatically,
Right.
before bottling. And it is going to help bring the wine together. It will also help with clarification. So if you're not filtering, it will help really polish the wine.
Yeah.
And in our case, we're just not going to do that. We get our clarity by frequently racking the wines every quarter, getting it off the sediments. And it's only going to be done if there is, in this case, both these wines included press wine. So the press wine for sure needs to have that tannin reduction done with the fresh egg
Before you
whites.
can put it into the blend.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And the interesting thing is in terms of ingredients and adding egg whites, although that's part of the process of making the wine, when we do the final analysis of the wine, we're talking about parts per billion that are actually showing
yeah.
up in the end wine, right? In terms
Or
of
not
egg.
even detectable
Right.
amounts, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting
Yeah.
that it is part of the process, but doesn't really end up. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets racked away basically, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So.
And it's been done for centuries, the use of fresh egg whites in winemaking.
Oh, I had an egg white omelet this morning. I mean, it's not bad for you, right?
No.
No. So, well, good. Well, I think we're going to come to the end. We try to keep this under an hour. It looks like we're at 55 minutes. So I want to thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate all the questions and your attention to this presentation. I want to thank the winemakers and David Gates, our viticulturist, for joining this morning. We'll look forward to seeing you in the fall. I mean, we can't get out and see you all personally every year, so this is a great way for us to touch base with you. We really enjoy this. Hopefully you're enjoying it as well and learning something about our wines and being able to take that out to your customers on a daily basis. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the fall. Have a good day.